And now, a third major aspect of reference, property, of which there are two major aspects. One is quality, let's say the color of something, and the other is quantity, whether it is just one thing or a countable thing, something of which there is more than one. Qualities can help us to identify instances. This specific thing can be distinguished perhaps because it has this particular color. They also help us to define concepts. A certain kind of thing is to be distinguished by its predictable color. Quantities are always 1 in the case of an instance, 0 in the case of an absence, and anything other than 1 in the case of a concept. Entities have properties, adjective-like, and so can actions, and they're adverb-like. As you can see now, that we have put them all together, none of these aspects of reference is a separate thing. The distinct names we have given them and the visually distinct places we have put them in the diagram give the wrong impression, though of course this is hard to avoid when we are using text and image to explain an idea. To make sense, we always need to be on the move, crossing from one aspect of meaning to another, because the meaning is in the crossing. This is why I'm now talking through the diagram with you. The meaning of reference is in the transposability of these different aspects, the slip sliding we need to do between one function of meaning and another in order to make sense.
These are only a few aspects of quality across the different forms, because there could be many more. We're now going to look at one quality as an example, and that's the quality of colour. Let's go back in our philosophies of meaning now, and let's talk about René Descartes for a moment. And what he said was that the reality of mind is more certain than the realities of bodily sensations, because things that I think my body touches, sees, hears, feels, could always be dreams. They could always be illusions. So in other words, that what we think we see in the world could be figments of our perception. And he goes on to say that if the qualities of perception are forever questionable, the only thing can be certain in our thinking is our thinking. So famously he has this formula, which in Latin is cogito ergo sum, which is I think, therefore I am. Thinking is the centre of the universe. So colour, in this view, must be a figment of our thinking. Here's an example of how this plays through for colour in a famous piece of research by Brent Berlin and Paul Kay. They gave this colour chart, the one that's behind me, to speakers in 98 different languages, and they asked them to identify the colours in their language. They were looking for what they call basic colour terms, or words that uniquely describe a colour. So in English, blue is a basic colour term, but orange is not, because the meaning actually comes from the colour of the fruit. They found some languages that only had 2 basic colour terms, Duni in New Guinea, Ngobi in Congo, Polyan in India, and they call these stage 1 languages. The dots are the names the respondents gave to the different colours across the colour chart. So you've got to, in your mind's eye, put this chart over the colour chart you saw a second ago. Some had 3, other languages had 5, others 6, until they reached languages that had up to 11 basic colour terms. Interestingly, for example, Russian has 2 different basic colour terms for blue, unlike English, where we have composite descriptors like light blue, dark blue, navy blue. Now, when the theorists who take a language-centric approach to meaning, like Berlin and Kay, they come up with conclusions like this, that the colours we are seeing are to some ways defined by the language that we speak. They're a figment of our language. So in a way, this is very much like what Descartes was saying. And if you like to reformulate Descartes, they might be saying, I think, therefore I see. Now here's what John Locke had to say by way of contrast. And he was talking about colours as well in some interesting ways. We come to these ideas that we have of yellow, white, of heat and cold, of soft and hard, of bitter and sweet. And these are all multimodal experiences actually of meaning when you come to think of it. Anyhow, I'm going on with the Locke quote now. And all those which we call sensible qualities are those which the senses have conveyed to our mind. So what Locke wants to do is put the senses ahead of thinking, the opposite of the Descartes view. I mean, they come from external objects, and they convey into the mind what produces these perceptions. Now, the important quote from Locke now, this is the great source of most of the ideas we have, depending wholly on our senses. What Locke then did is Locke came up with an idea of what he called a tabula rasa, a blank slate. So to go on with Locke at the moment, I call these sensations. If a child were kept in a place where he never saw any other but black and white till he were a man, he would have no ideas of scarlet or green. So in the Locke view, mind follows sensible matter. If I wanted to revise Descartes' cogito ergo sum for Locke, perhaps what Locke might have said was, I see, therefore I think, in relation to colours. Now let's jump forward a few centuries, and here we see the pixels, the little dots that make up an image on a screen, like the screen that you're now looking at. The top ones are on an old-fashioned cathode ray tube. I presume you're not looking at that. And the bottom ones are on an LCD screen, which I guess is probably what you're looking at now. So if you like, the digital world we have is really only made of three basic colours. So if we don't take a language-centric view of things, let's take a digital 21st century view of things. There are only three basic colours, which is red, blue and green, or five if you include turning the pixel off, and white when you turn them all on at full strength. So different combinations of pixels can, with 24-bit encoding, create over 16 million colours, though the eye can only easily pick out 2 million of these. So what are we talking about? The Berlin and Kay basic colours, which might be different for different languages, or we're talking about a human capacity to distinguish differences of 2 million different colours. So what the digital screen does is more than, the differentiation is more than what the eye can even deal with. One of the arguments that Mary and I would like to make in this grammar is that, of course, we see stuff based on our mind's apprehension of the world. But also the world comes into our mind. So we want to have a bit of Locke and we want to have a bit of Descartes as well. And the reality is on this screen where you see all these colours now arrayed in this particular way, there's just too much happening for us humans to be making it up. We couldn't be inventing 2 million different colours. They're there in what's possible in our eyes, in our bodily, material, very ordinary realities. And also there's much more than we could feasibly name. So one of the interesting things about the modern world is, we had a colour system called the Pantone system, which named hundreds and hundreds of colours in terms of colour matching, gave them funny, fancy names, but also gave them numbers. And what we now do in the digital world is we define these 2 million points by particular quantifications of red, green, blue, on and off. So what'll happen is that in the realm of this particular quality, of the quality of colour, image can exceed what is ever possible in speech. So here's a colour matching system like Pantone, which was developed in the 1950s, which has 2,000 colours. Now you can't remember the name of 2,000 colours. You can't speak them in a spontaneous conversation. You might have had one fancy colour for a particular wall that you're painting in your house, and you might remember that, but you can't remember 2,000 of them. So here's another striking difference between speech and text. When we speak these names, we refer to the number which is written down, or we refer to the funny fancy name that this shade of green's been given in the Pantone swatches, but that's an exercise in reading. We're very limited in the colours that we can speak from memory, so we have to read them from text and align that text with the actual colour itself in image in order to be able to remember some of the important colour differences connected with painting a room or designing a brochure, for example. PMS colours, the old PMS system, which was done with printed inks on paper, PMS, by the way, stands for Pantone Matching System, these can be converted into the universal digital language of colour. You might not know this, but there's only one international language of colour now, which is called the International Colour Profiles, created by a non-profit organisation, and it's based on spectrometer readings of colour, and there's no arguing with these measures. So we want to actually now side with Locke for a moment, in the sense that these things are based on readings, and there's no disagreement about the exact spectrometer reading for a particular Pantone colour. So this is now the world of the way in which the qualities of colour become digitised. By the end of this discussion of quality now, we're actually edging towards the next transposition that we want to explore, and that's the transposition of quality into quantity that is now so ubiquitously a part of our digital world.